My name is Grant Cameron, and I'm from Winnipeg, Manitoba, Canada. I'm a researcher who's been at this since 1975, so I've been at 43 years. Had an experience which led me into the field. Really didn't have any interest in the field. And it's gone from my interest has gone from one subject to another. 75, because at that time I had a bunch of sightings. People in the town had a bunch of sightings. Nobody would publish the book. So at that point, all I was really interested in is who knew what was going on. Somebody had to know what this was that I had seen. So I started this chase that I always talk about. I went to the Canadian government first, then I chased the former president of Penn State University, had 14 honorary doctorate degrees, chairman of the board of the Institute for Defense Analysis, top military think tank in the country. President of Penn State University for 16 years. Chased him around for 8 years. He seemed to know what was going on, but he didn't really want to talk. Then I chased the President of the United States. And then while I was chasing the head people at the CIA, intelligence people who I believed knew what was going on, I had a download experience, which changed everything for me. It sort of moved me from the nuts and bolts aspect of the UFO phenomena to the idea that a lot of this is consciousness. A lot of this is messaging. It's this kind of stuff. And it was during that period of time when I had this sort of download experience that I realized that the experiencers that, for example, in the latest round of disclosure stuff, you'll see they've leaked some videos through the New York Times, Washington Post, Politico. And I suddenly realized, it confirmed the fact that you really can't tell anything by a video. You can watch the video for 70 years, every day. And all it's going to tell you is it's pretty strange, and we probably didn't build it. But it doesn't tell you who's flying it, where they're from, why they're here, what's the message. And I started to deal with experiencers, and I've spent probably since 2012, so the last 6 years, basically dealing with experiencers, people who've had experiences, to find out, did you get a message? Did they tell you what's going on? Stuff like that. And I realized that the government was doing the same thing. But from time to time, and what I'm going to lecture here at Eureka Springs on, is what most people are still fascinated with, the whole government disclosure. When are they going to disclose? And I got dragged into this story because I was dealing with these high-level government people. And I got to know some of these people, interact with some of these people. And so in the last year, if people have been following, there's a story that has arisen about a rock star by the name of Tom DeLonge. And he'd sold 30 million albums. Every time he tweets something, he gets 15,000 retweets, major figure in Los Angeles. And he got into the UFO phenomena, and what he did was he got inside the government. He got a bunch of people, high-level people inside the government, to talk to him and to start to give him material. So I followed this story. I had people inside the story who were feeding me what was going on. And some of them were experiencers, because that's part of the deal, is that people don't realize that a lot of these people who are doing this disclosure thing, recently, for example, Jim Semivan, who's a 25-year veteran of the CIA, ran covert ops for the CIA for 2 years, is involved in this. He's basically the director of this To the Stars Academy that's behind this recent disclosure story. He's an experiencer. He had the beings in his room in the 1990s, early 1990s, with his wife. And so he's a guy, it's not evil government guy who's trying to cover up, it's Jim Semivan trying to figure out what happened to me. And so I got dragged into this, realized that a lot of these people are experiencers, wrote a book called Managing Magic, the government's UFO disclosure plan. And sort of the basis of that, my whole theory, which some people have challenged, some people have gone along with, is that the government needs to get it out. There's people inside the government, not everybody, but a small group of people inside the government, who are determined that the American people have to know this story. You have to get it out. So this is a plan where what they do is they'll put material into the UFO community, into the public, and then at the same time they'll put in false information to stop it from going viral. So you put it out, then you put disinformation around it, and what happens is the story bounces around. There's two different versions. Nobody knows what to believe, and yet the idea gets out. So some of the ideas that they might leak are the idea that there was a live alien, that it was a guest of the U.S. government, or that Area 51, that we've got crafts at Area 51, or the idea that there's a group of very high-level people, 12 people, who run the whole program. So I wrote Managing Magic, which was my sort of synopsis of this whole thing. And what I said is they've done this for 70 years. They've leaked stuff to people like Steven Spielberg, to other various documentary people, leaked these stories, and yet to sort of cover up the story at the same time to control this gradual release. So when people are looking at this latest story about To the Stars Academy with Tom DeLonge, this rock star, everybody thinks, well, they've suddenly decided to release this thing. Well, no, they've been doing it all along. They've been doing it every year. So Managing Magic, I went through every year. I went year after year after year. I said, okay, 56 is what they did, 60, 62, 60, and I would identify these things that people really didn't realize had been going on all the time. And so that's what I'm going to be lecturing on here, is the latest stories, the latest videos, what's happening, how this group was set up, and how the Washington Post got involved, the New York Times, what they're actually trying to do. And I've got a second book coming out that I'm working on right now, which will be the latest update to this thing. And that's what I'll do. And I'll also get into one story that still nobody knows because it's just happening as we speak. And that is that the guy I chased at the CIA, his name is Dr. Ron Pandolfi. And they have a desk at it's called the Weird Desk at the CIA. And people don't realize that when it comes to UFOs in the Central Intelligence Agency, it's not just UFOs. They call it phenomenology. So it's not just UFOs, it's remote viewing, psychic phenomena, telepathy, ghosts, all what they call the weird stuff. And what it basically says is there is a part of reality that we've missed that's beyond the physical world, and that all this stuff is linked together. So we always parse it. We say, okay, you're a channeler, you're an experiencer, a contactee, an abductee, you're a medium, you're this, and it's all the same thing. They're just disassociating. They're coming into contact with this higher level of consciousness. And so one of the stories that interested me was because I'd moved away after my consciousness experience, I'd moved away from the idea that this is nuts and bolts. And I sort of went to the Jacques Vallée idea that I'd be very surprised if this turns out to just be extraterrestrials visiting. It's much more complex than that. It has these consciousness aspects. One of the stories that I'd been chasing for a couple of years was that this Ron Pandolfi guy was leaking material through a guy by the name of Dan Smith. And the way this operates is there's always plausible deniability. The president doesn't know. It's like he's an idiot, he doesn't know. It's plausible deniability. You don't want people asking questions of the president because he's the guy running the cover-up. And so what Ron Pandolfi had done was he put his material through a guy by the name of Dan Smith. He's got 2 master's degrees in physics. His father was a financial expert with the Eisenhower administration, very wealthy guy. And he's an eschatologist. He believes in the end of the world. He's very religious. And he's been blogging for 27 years material that Dr. Ron Pandolfi has been feeding him about what's going on. But the thing is, nobody really believes it because he's talking about the end of the world. He's mixing philosophy in it and stuff like that. And everybody goes, Dan Smith, don't listen to Dan Smith. He doesn't know what he's talking about, And that's the way they want it. They have this plausible deniability. So about a couple days ago, this idea of the portal came up again. And the idea interested me because if there's a portal, and this is the story they've been running around for about 2 years, Ron Pandolfi and the CIA have been putting out this impression that there's portal technology, that we've actually are sort of on the verge of understanding how this works, that we can actually build this stuff. So I was interested because if portals exist, then the nuts and bolts idea of the universe is in a lot of trouble. This indicates what I got in my download experience is that it's much more complex than nuts and bolts. It's got to do with consciousness. It's got to do with quantum physics. It's got to do with the nature of reality. And so you look at it, is the world made out of little nuts and bolts, or is it made out of consciousness? Does matter cause consciousness, or does consciousness cause matter? And what I'm stating is that consciousness creates matter. You do not get matter until you have consciousness. You have to have an observer to break down the quantum wave, which produces matter. So it's this sort of thing. So I was very interested in the portal technology, because if this existed where you can actually just sort of walk through this thing and be in another world instantaneously or another dimension, it shows that the world is a lot less physical than people think it is. So I've been chasing this story, and it really was, it was sort of like he does it in rhymes and riddles. It's all plausible deniability. So it wasn't like, here's the portal, here's where you go, this kind of stuff like Santa Claus. We're going to give you the story. It's always very indirect. The story had almost faded away until about a week and a half ago, when suddenly I was told that the story's back on again. And the story centers around a guy by the name of Joe Firmage. And Joe Firmage ran a $3 billion computer company in the 1990s. CEO, very, very powerful guy. Had an experience where a being appeared in his room in the middle of the night. And he started talking about space travel. And the being said, well, why do you want to be able to go to space? And he said, because I'm willing to die for it. And it's that point that he got some sort of download, he got some sort of information, and he basically quits his company. He quits as CEO, has a lot of money, and he starts putting money into technology to develop portal technology, to be able to bypass into another world, this sort of thing. And there was always a story that he had it, and no, he didn't have it, and I was trying to track this down. So about 2 weeks ago, it was mentioned to me that the story's back on and that he's got this. And on Joe Firmage's website, you can actually see this technology. He has about, on his YouTube site, he has maybe 7 videos. And one of them talks about the being coming in the room. And he describes in fair detail his incident in the middle of the night. But the other thing he shows is an instrument. And what it looks like is a cage. They call it the bouncing box, but it's a cage, and it has these spinning devices inside. One spinning in one direction, one spinning in, and they go faster and faster and faster. And suddenly this box starts to bounce, and it starts to almost like levitate off the ground. So there's a dispute as to, is this levitation, is this anti-gravity, gravity control, or is this a portal? So people are telling me, no, he's just got a gravitational device. This is not a portal. And I was told that he was involved, and a guy by the name of Kevin Albert was involved. And Kevin Albert was working for Ron Pandolfi. And as a civilian, he's apparently has, intelligence background from Mossad, and we're in California, and he was involved. And then the third name that was mentioned to me a couple of weeks ago was a guy by the name of Dan Merritt, who was a Republican congressman for the state of Utah I think he left in the 1980s, late 1980s. And so that's where it led. And then about Wednesday of this week, a couple of days ago, I started getting phone calls from Dan Smith. You're not answering your phone. I need to talk to you. There's been developments at the lake, which is Salt Lake City. That's where Joe Firmage lives. And he said to me, there's been developments. I need to talk to you, because they sort of see me as a spokesman. A lot of the groups, like whether it's the CIA people or whether it's To the Stars, or whether it's there's a guy out of Stanford where they're doing these experiments with experiencers, where they basically say that I'm pretty well accurate on what I'm saying. So I'm seen as sort of a spokesman. People are trying to put stuff through me. So Dan was trying to get this out. You need to know. And he actually started using the word managing magic. And the reason I used the term was, it's not UFOs, it's magic. It's all the different phenomena. And that they're managing the story. They're trying to manage this very bizarre aspect to reality. So he said, you're not answering your phone. Then I went to a blog site where they blog this stuff. And you really can't tell because it's all this philosophy stuff. And unless you know where to read or whatever. And it appeared that they had on Tuesday evening, that they had put this instrument, they had perfected this thing. And this Dan Merritt guy, the former congressman, had put in $4 million into this invention. And they spent apparently $90 million on this project over the years. So they had formed a new company, that's what I was told. And that Albert was the CEO. The chairman of the company was this Dan Merritt, this former congressman, and then Joe Firmage. And that they had perfected the device. So the dating on this project was, the first mention of the portal was in about 2016, beginning of the year when they started talking about this. And we're now in April, and this is when this story seems to have completely developed, April of 2018. And so early this month, or maybe in late March, was the first time I heard that they had sort of perfected this thing, that something was happening, that they were going to run this experiment. So it would be maybe around April the 6th that they're supposed to run a test. They're supposed to run a test. And I was told that that Ron and Aliha Pandolfi, who's his wife, were going to go to Colorado. So they would be there right now. It's just be April the 13th that they were going to run, and there's people coming from around the world to look at this experiment. But what happened on Tuesday night is that they ran this experiment. They ran this bouncing box thing, and I guess some sort of portal thing opened up, and there was a being came out of the portal, and they were filming this whole thing. And there was a telepathic message between Kevin Elber and this being. And Ron Pandolfi himself posted on this website, and he posts under a name called Footman. And he talks in rhymes and riddles, but he's basically talking about this incident with the message, with the being and stuff like that. And so what they had said in the postings was, we don't want to have another Nimitz fiasco, sort of indicating that when Tom DeLonge released the Nimitz video with the New York Times article in December of 2017, that it didn't go anywhere. Like, people said, oh, it's a hoax. They've had it before and stuff like that. So they said, we don't want to get into that same thing where people are going to say it's a hoax. So it's at this point, I've learned about it Wednesday, and I've come to Eureka Springs. It's now Friday, and I've got an associate who was in Washington, lives in Washington, who works for a law firm there, who's coming here, and we're going to try to make the phone calls, and I'm going to see whether on Sunday I can get this video. I very much doubt I'll be able to get the video, but they have a video, or at least get the complete story of what actually happened on Tuesday night. So it gives you an indication, if this is true, and I think there is some truth to the story, that the idea of a physical world is in trouble, and that we do have some sort of portal technology. We have something where we understand this interdimensional thing, and this would be the idea of where these beings, and I always call it the intelligence behind the phenomena, that they aren't really flying through space with giant spacecrafts. They're popping from one point in space to another point in space. And they're coming through these gateways, these portals, these, whatever you want to call them. That's how they get here. So that's basically what my presentation is going to be. And it's what people want. I'm more interested still in the consciousness thing. I've just released my book on music, the connection between rock musicians and paranormal phenomena and UFOs, detailing how many major musicians I believe are experiencers that have actually, been abductees. They've downloaded songs. They do lyrics for UFO stuff like that, and that great influence. But what I'll be doing here is this disclosure thing, which is everybody's is waiting for. And what I say is they're releasing stuff, yes, in drips and drabs, and this will continue probably for the next 7 years. I've heard this program will take 7 years for them to run through. And what they are doing is, people want disclosure. They want the whole answer. Tell us what's going on. Give us all the details, whatever. And what they have done is, in December 16th, 2017, they basically released the first 2 videos. And what they've done is what I say is confirmation. And the guy who controls all the material is a guy by the name of Bob Bigelow. He's a big billionaire in Las Vegas. He held the government contract that did the investigation on the UFOs. He has all the film, the medals, he has everything. And he had stated in 2013 in an interview already that what we need is confirmation, not disclosure. And what confirmation is what they did in December. You release the story, you have these high-level government officials, they come forward, they say we're high-level government officials, and the UFO story is for real, and you stop right there. You don't say who it is. You don't say where they're from. You don't talk about alien cattle mutilations, alien abductions. You just say, yes, we have a phenomena, UFO phenomena. It's for real, and we're trying to figure out what's going on. So that's confirmation. And then once everybody gets used to it, then you go to where they're coming from, that sort of stuff. And so what they're trying to do, I believe, is they're trying to shift the general public. They don't care about the UFO community. They don't care what we think, because we'll ask all sorts of hard questions. Nobody's going to believe them anyway. But the general public, the person who's on the street, who's like a swing voter in an election, really doesn't know, really doesn't care, sees the video and goes, oh, the government's got a program. And look at, they released this video. And you swing the average person to shift consciousness inside the American public. That's what they're doing. Absolutely guarantee people that's what they're doing, is shifting consciousness. And down the road, they will get into, they do know, they have a lot of answers, but those answers won't come for a number of years. In December 16th, 2016, there was 2 videos released through the New York Times, through the Washington Post, and Politico. And the important part of it is that all 3 news agencies went on the same day. So if you talk to people inside, they'll say, no, it was just good reporting by the New York Times, or it was just an investigation. This guy just retired, and he came out and he decided that UFOs have to be investigated. The fact that 3 news agencies all went on the same day on a story that took them a couple months to do proves that this was coordinated by the government. They coordinated all 3 newspapers to go at the same time, because these newspapers never did UFO stories. They were major media outlets who never touched UFO stories. So them all to go. And they released these videos, which were significant in that as soon as it happened, I went to the reporter who asked Hillary Clinton the first question this would be 2015, December of 2015. He asked Hillary Clinton, what do you think about UFOs? And she said, I think we need the answers. I think we need to disclose something. She started talking about UFOs. So when these videos were released, and both the Washington Post and New York Times were shown these videos before, which indicates that this is a setup story. They were shown the videos, they were shown documents, they were sold the story by intelligence officials. We need you to go with this story. So the videos came out, and everybody was sort of in awe of these videos, because what they show is, the one is from the Nimitz. It was an incident that happened in November of 2004 with the Nimitz carrier group off of San Diego. And they have this big, huge aircraft carrier. They have a destroyer. They have an aerial plane that's got radar on it. And all these ships. So it's not just one ship. There's this whole carrier group, jet fighters and stuff like that. And for a couple of days or a couple of weeks, they were picking up these objects that were there all the time. And they would go up to 80,000 feet, and they would drop down to 50 feet above the ocean. They would create this sort of a stir inside the ocean. It looked like a plane was sinking and stuff like that. And so at one point they send out 2 jet fighters to investigate this, and they run out of fuel. They can't do it anymore. So they pull them back. Then they send off these 2 jet fighters from the coast, from an Air Force base in California, to investigate this. It's at that point they run into this object. And so these 2 guys are watching this object, and the thing turns towards them. According to one of the people involved, there was a shoot-down order given that they were to shoot this thing down. And the one tries to get in behind the object, and meanwhile they're filming this with cameras. And so what the New York Times did and the Washington Post did is they released these videos of sort of like gun camera footage of this object. And then they released a second one, but when they released it, they really didn't say when it was. Turned out the second video they released was not from the same incident. It was from 2015 off of Florida. And this one had the 2 pilots talking. And these 2 pilots are saying, did you see that? There's a whole fleet of them and stuff like this. They're talking on the camera. So these videos came out, and they were very dramatic. And it shifted the Washington Post, New York Times, and all the news media, whether it was Fox or whether it was CNN or any of these other major news agencies. Basically, what they would say is, oh, the Department of Defense has released a UFO video. Meanwhile, in the UFO community, I and a number of other people are trying to find out, we're trying to get documentation. So when this thing broke, I had this guy who had asked Hillary Clinton the question. He was a reporter from a small newspaper in New Hampshire. I said, Damon Steer was his name. I said, Damon, can you file an FOA? Let's get the material. Let's get these films. Let's get a documentation that this actually happened. He phoned, before he filed the FOA, he phones the Defense Department and they say, sorry, sir, we did not release any video. And yet the video is in the New York Times, it's in the Washington Post. And he said, well, I want to file an FOIA. Who do I file it to? Do I file it to the Defense Department, Defense Intelligence Agency? Who do I file it? I said, sorry, sir, I can't help you. We did not, all I can tell you, sir, is we did not release any video. That, we're talking 4 months later, is the same situation. They still will say, we didn't release any video. Yet the significant thing is that the guy who wrote the story for the New York Times, one of the guys is Ralph Blumenthal. Ralph Blumenthal had won a Pulitzer Prize. The guy who did the Washington Post article had won 2 Pulitzer Prizes. These were national security reporters who had many years with top newspapers, would not have gone with that story unless they had at least 2 confirmations from inside the Pentagon that these videos are for real. If they had what we had, which was the guy saying, we didn't release those videos, they never would have gone with the story. So they had a confirmation. So this shows you how they play this game. They put the videos out and everybody believed they had released them when they hadn't released them. And they released them not to the defense guy that came out, Lou Elizondo was his name. Lou Elizondo said, I didn't release the videos. They released them to the stars. So it's all a big mix-up, and people are saying, where are the documents? And we filed for documents. There's been, I think, 1,500 FOIAs filed, up to 2,000 FOIAs filed, because this is a major story. All sorts of people trying to get the documentation and the videos and stuff, and everybody's got nothing. People are saying, the government is saying, we don't have any records. So they're not confirming there was an investigation. They're not confirming there were videos. They're not confirming anything. They're basically saying, no, it didn't happen. And that's this sort of mix-up thing where I say they release the information, then they release the counterintelligence operation, and it bounces around. So people look at the video, and a lot of the public will know, oh yeah, I saw the video from the New York Times. It's been all over all the major news media, and the news media are all making the same mistake, is they're just repeating it. They're saying the Defense Department released another video today, because there was a third video that was released in March, early March of 2018. And in that video, it was released through the Washington Post. And again, everybody repeated it. It was picked up by Fox, by BBC, and by CNN and all that stuff. And they all said the same thing. Oh, the Defense Department released another UFO video. When you go to the Defense Department, no, we didn't release any video. And that's how they do it. So it's plausible deniability, and it's letting the story get out there and bounce around. And from what I'm told, this is going to go on for 7 years. They're going to drop these videos. What I'm told is they have 24 videos. And then there was one that NASA was going to release as well, 2 videos that they contributed. So we could have another 23 videos coming. And the other thing they talked about was the fact that they had metal, that they had this metal that, if you listen to Linda Howe, she'll say it's 36 layers, 36 to 38 layers thick, with 1 to 4 microns thick, about 1/4 of an inch, with all these layers. And that even today, we cannot reproduce this material. It's so thin and it's so pure. So it's made of magnesium and these different elements that are so pure. The aluminum is like 99.9%, like pure aluminum. And so this metal stuff they have that they're going to be talking about. And then there's another program that I'm not going to talk about here. I'll just briefly mention it, which to me is the most important part. So the DeLonge operation was set up where these intelligence guys came in. They were able to operate through his company, put all this material out. So they have 26 videos. They have 38 papers that were produced. Some of them are up to 490 pages. But I think a lot of those are theoretical papers on space propulsion, stuff like that. Then you have the metals, And then the fourth one I say is the most important one. They are doing work with experiencers. So what the people that are running it, one guy his name is Dr. Kit Green, who had Ron Pandolfi's job. From 69 to 83, he ran the weird desk at the CIA, all the paranormal stuff at the CIA. He is one of the guys, he's a physiologist. So he's interested in brain scans, MRIs. So what they have done is they've taken all people who have been injured by UFOs. And this is a lot of black ops people, some experiencers from the general public, and they taking highly psychic people like Uri Geller, Joe McMoneagle, they have Ingo Swann's DNA, people like that. And what they have discovered, according to the rumors, and they haven't put out any peer-reviewed papers where you can they detail what it is, but what I hear is that they have determined that every experiencer and every highly psychic person has a DNA marker that they can actually determine. There's a marker in your DNA. What they say is that your DNA will record everything that's happened to you. So if you've had a cold, if you've had the flu, it will leave a marker on your DNA, and they can actually detail this, these markers. So there's a marker in every one of these people that's the same. And the other thing they have is a particular brain pattern. And what they call it is the antenna. It's an antenna brain pattern, which is where I was going with consciousness, which says that when you have an experiencer, you have somebody who is able to tap in to make contact with whatever this intelligence is that we're dealing with. And so you have these brain patterns, whether it's a medium, whether it's a psychic, whether it's an abductee or Uri Geller, they have this ability to tap into the field. And that's what distinguishes them. So this to me is significant, which means that if you've had experiences, you'll go tell your friends, oh, I had this experience, whatever, and they go, it's just a story. You just imagined it. It was a dream, whatever. And as Gary Nolan, he's from Stanford University, has a big genetics lab at Stanford University. He's one of the 3 people on this program with the experiencers. He says genetics doesn't lie. So if you say I'm an experiencer, when this is all said and done and they can get these peer-reviewed papers, they can actually take your DNA and they can say, yeah, he's an experiencer. He has the marker. It's something you can actually quantify, you can measure, and you can actually say to the skeptical community, scientific community who says, no, people are just making this stuff up. It's all garbage. It's not true. They can actually say, no, this is quantitative. Everybody has it. It's duplicatable. And it'll move us into a whole new realm where experiencers are taken much more serious. And I've even talked to some people here. One, I just did an interview with a woman who was injured. She has autoimmune disease, which a lot of these people have. And so I said, I'll see what I can do. Maybe we can get your DNA tested. And they may have some sort of, because they've dealt with a lot of these people, they may have some sort of way to deal with it, maybe some sort of way to cure it or whatever. And that's where you got to go, that these things are happening for a reason. And I think it'll move us a long way down the road. Instead of just anecdotal stories, you have something you can actually duplicate and measure. In terms of the evidence, in terms of what we're looking at to verify it, the witnesses that I hear there's apparently over 100 people in this program now. A lot of them are black ops people. And Kit Green, who was running it, he talked to a woman by the name of Annie Jacobson, who was a former editor for the Los Angeles Times, who wrote a book called Phenomena. And the Phenomena book was looking at remote viewing inside the CIA. And she's nominated for Pulitzer Prize, very major investigative reporter. When they talked to her, his theory was that a lot of these injury cases are people who are black ops, who have been dealing with this technologies, because the UFO is going to work on some sort of technology, and that they may have been hit by a beam or some sort of mistake in the black world technology that they're using. But the marker thing would be different. It would be not so much the injury thing. It would be, the marker would be there from birth or wherever it is. I've heard one story that it was from birth. They have this marker. So the injury stuff may not mean that you're actually interacting with the beings, although the question is if you're up close, because one of the people that's in this study is a guy by the name of John Burroughs. And John Burroughs was one of the people at Rendlesham Forest, who when they went and this thing was sitting on the ground, and John Burroughs and Penniston went up, and Penniston put his hand on the craft and it had these symbols and he could feel the symbols. And John Burroughs had a heart problem. So you had this shredded sort of heart valve, and the doctors couldn't figure out what was wrong with him. So he was badly injured. It was actually Kit Green who actually went to his doctor and said he was exposed to a high magnetic field. So that was the idea, that sometimes if you get too close to a craft, you will experience this. So you'll have the experiencers who are in close to the craft, or my friend, he has this sort of autoimmune disease. And what he told me, he was told it was from touching the craft when it was powered up, that you're not allowed to touch the craft when it's powered up. And that's where he claimed he got it from. So you're going to have the injury ones that are caused by being too close to the craft, or by the back engineered technology that the Black Ops is using that injures people. But then you're also going to have the other group of experiencers who have the DNA marker, who have interacted with the beings. And what I would say that when you interact with the beings, it's going to be a lot less physical. It's going to be, they're going to take you out of your body like a near-death experience, or not a body experience. And it becomes a lot less physical in terms of, you're going through walls, you're doing all this kind of stuff. So that would be the distinction, that right now, because we haven't seen the data that they have, and what they told me, and, was sort of to back off, and I can understand what they're saying, is that we got to get these papers out. If we sort of expose all this stuff now, we're going to look like a bunch of crazy people. And people who realize that when you go to a peer-reviewed journal, these people are going to be very, very skeptical. These are going to be people who really don't believe in UFOs. They think this is all total nuts. So you have to have pretty strong evidence. And that's where they're saying, let us get this peer-reviewed papers out where we can actually show that there's markers and stuff. And then I guess they go to the next step as to determining whether this is accidental injury, whether it's interaction with the beings. I think once you get to the beings, you'll have people who have these sort of injuries, especially these inflammation type injuries. But a lot of it is a lot less physical than people think it is with these experiences, which is the important thing about the portal, is it sort of shows that it's not quite as physical as you think it is. It's got these ideas that consciousness is primary, that the whole world may be a thought, that you may be creating your environment, even getting down to the idea that maybe because you see a gray, you have a certain personality. That if you're very negative, you'll see a negative being. If you're very positive, you're going to see a positive being. And that you're manifesting, you're helping, almost like John Wheeler, the guy who won the Nobel Prize in 1960, who came up with the idea of wormholes and the black holes. He said it's a participatory universe where you participate in what you see, that you're interacting with this thing. So it gets very, very complex. But the important part, I think, is that we actually are going to have some actual data, that we have names and targets, and that you can actually determine these people all have a very characteristic thing that can be measured and can be shown on a graph.